Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another installment of our weekly Humanism speaker series through the Humanist Association of San Diego. Today is about healing. We like to talk about the separation of church and state. We like to talk about science. We like to talk about philosophy. But one critical, important aspect of any community is healing. Coming together to heal old wounds, coming together to become stronger. It's rather difficult to heal by yourself. We're a social animal and we need other people. And when we're looking at the subject in context of religion and past religious affiliation, religion is such a deep personal matter that it's no wonder that when scars are inflicted, they tend to cut deeper than most. So today we're going to talk about healing from religious trauma. There's a lot of good things that come from religion, and those good things that come from religion tend to all be humanistic. If we look at mainline Christianity, we see them mainline Christians ditching the more harsh, repressive aspects of the Old Testament. And they tend to affirm more uplifting aspects of humanity that tend to find those particular more aggressive and egregious elements a non-starter. Why? Because the humanistic side of our natures tends to take over. So today is a day for healing. We need healing, especially more now than ever. Right now, we are in the midst of an ever-present, ubiquitous, existential crisis. This crisis is reminding us of our mortality. It's making us feel, some of us feel especially helpless at this moment. We need other people. One of the things about human beings is we are social animals. And with social distancing, because we care about other people, because we want this madness to stop, we're losing that face-to-face interaction that we need. We're losing those consensual, nurturing touches that create positive, healthy social bonds. A hug, as it's been said, is the original contact high. And there have been far less hugs these days, mainly because we care enough not to hug each other right now because we want to hug each other in the future. And so we need healing now more than ever. And today is going to focus on religious trauma. Today, we are going to be speaking to someone who experienced a great amount of religious trauma as a former member of a cult. That cult has been in the news all over the place the last few days. Choral Anika Theill is going to talk to us about her past membership in the group People of Praise. And then we have our feature presenter today, Dr. Daryl Ray. And Daryl Ray is a clinician who is dedicated to helping people heal from their religious trauma. Daryl Ray started an organization called Recovering from Religion. Recovering from Religion, Daryl will talk about shortly during his presentation on religious trauma syndrome. It's all around the planet. We used to have a strong, well-attended Recovering from Religion group in San Diego, and we're working to bring that back. And we will bring that up shortly. So like I said, today is a day of healing. It's a day to concentrate on the benefits of healing together. And this is one of the primary aspects of community. This is why we come together as the Humanist Association of San Diego. And this is especially pertinent since we came back and we started coming together again. We've had plenty of conversations, and I've had plenty of conversations both on the main chat and in private that are demonstrable of why we need this talk on religious trauma healing. Reasons for groups like ours are to be a landing place for people to come together who have been damaged by their experience with religious affiliations and with religious institutions. Some of us have had the benefit of not being burdened by this. Other people, unfortunately, have. So as a community, we come together and we're going to work together to heal and start focusing on avenues for those of you who need more help in healing from past and current religious traumas. And that's what we're here for as a community. So without further ado, we will go on to our first speaker of the day to talk to us for 5 or 6 minutes on her experience. And the reason that we have Coral here today is because there is a nominee before the United States Supreme Court who's a member of a group that's been called a cult. That group is called People of Praise. That nominee is a current judge on the 7th Circuit Appellate Court of the United States, Amy Coney Barrett. And there is something to think about in terms of us as humanists and our commitment to the separation of church and state on this as well. And this should be brought up. In 1960, on September 12, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy received a lot of flack for being a Catholic and being the second Catholic to run for president, the first being Al Smith in 1920. So in that particular address at the Rice Hotel in front of the Ministers Association in Houston, Texas, Kennedy addressed the criticism that he was receiving for being a Catholic. In that address, he said, while the so-called religious issue is necessarily and properly the chief topic here tonight, I want to emphasize from the outset that we have far more critical issues to face in the 1960 election: the spread of communist influence, the humiliating treatment of our president and vice president by those who no longer respect our power, the hungry children I saw in West Virginia, and the old people who cannot pay their doctor bills, the families who forced to give up their farms in America with too many slums and too far schools and too late to the moon and outer space. These are the real issues which should decide this campaign. Because I'm a Catholic and no Catholic has ever been elected president, the real issues of this campaign have been obscured, perhaps deliberately, in some quarters less responsible than this. So it is apparently necessary for me to state once again, not what kind of church I believe in, for that should be important only to me, but what kind of America I believe in. I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act, and no Protestant minister would tell his parishioners for whom to vote, and no church or church school is granted any public funds or political preference, and where no man is denied public office merely because his religion differs from the president who might appoint him or the people who might elect him. I believe in an America that is officially neither Catholic, Protestant, nor Jewish, where no official either requests or accepts instructions on public policy from the Pope, the National Council of Churches, or any ecclesiastical source, where no religious body seeks to impose its will directly or indirectly on the general populace or the public acts of its officials, and where religious liberty is so indivisible that an act against one church is treated as an act against all. So, in America, where the separation of church and state is absolute, we are dealing with questions over whether or not Amy Coney Barrett is fit to be an associate justice on the US Supreme Court due to her religious affiliations. There's a stirring debate on this right now. This is something that we're going to continue having, and we're going to briefly touch on this. And Coral is kind enough to come back and discuss this at greater depth with us later. But I want to ask Coral some questions about her experience in People of Praise and how that affected her. We'll go over the political issues later, but Coral is going to also be seen on CNN with Aaron Burnett this upcoming week. She's been interviewed by Newsweek, by Mother Jones, by the Associated Press, by Reuters, and a dozen other sources. So the political chat on this, on the separation of church and state, Coral is kind enough to offer herself as a resource to discuss these issues at a later date, especially because there was an op-ed in the New York Times in the past couple days demonstrating that the most recent additions to the court, the Donald Trump nominees, side with religious organizations 100% of the time. The democratically appointed nominees side with churches between 45 to 55% of the time. And in terms of the separation of church and state and the mass blurring of this issue at the moment, this is something that we need to talk about. And we'll talk about this with Coral in the near future. But I'd like to ask Coral some questions about her time with People of Praise and how that's affected her. And then that will lead us into Darrel's talk on recovering from religion. So Coral, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
You were a member of People of Praise.
Yes.
Had you heard of it before you got involved with People of Praise? How did you get into People of Praise? And how did that change your sense of self, your sense of agency? And you sought to escape People of Praise. How long did it take you to want to escape? And how long did it take you to escape?
Well, in brief, I never wanted to join, but I was married, and my husband, Marty Warner of Independence, Oregon, believed I should be absolutely obedient, and I was forced to join the Catholic Church immediately after our marriage in '76, and then he began to meet a lot of the People of Praise movement and community in Corvallis, Oregon, that attended St. Mary's Catholic Church in Corvallis, Oregon. So they encouraged him to join. I did not want to. I stated my concerns, and I really didn't have a voice, so I was forced to. So we were members between '79 and '84, and I still have contact with numerous former members. Most everybody that escapes is pretty traumatized, so very few people are open to speak about it. But I did publish my memoir in 2003 and speak specifically about it at the beginning of my memoir. But we met people, basically their common denominator was the absolute submission of women and speaking in tongues and prophecy and believing they were the remnant and living out the Bible as it was supposed to be. And they were, a lot of them were from South Bend, Indiana, where Judge Amy Coney Barrett is a member.
And while you were involved with People of Praise, the primary thing that people are bringing up with this, and in a 1986 interview on this topic, Margaret Atwood, the author of The Handmaid's Tale, and most recently The Fall of the Testaments, gave an interview in which she said, there is a sect now, a Catholic charismatic spin-off sect. And keep in mind, the charismatic Christian movement came about in the 1960s. It was sort of like the Pentecostal movement that said that there are miracles everywhere and there are gifts of the Spirit. The primary difference between charismatics and Pentecostals is a lack of speaking in tongues. And the most conspicuous offshoot of the charismatic movement that's Catholic, and this also happened after Vatican II, when the Pope made the rules far more lenient. So it's easy to infer that Atwood was referring to People of Praise. Atwood said, there is a sect now, a Catholic charismatic spin-off sect, which calls their women handmaids. They don't go in for polygamy of this kind, but they do threaten the handmaids according to the biblical verse I use in the book, sit down and shut up.
Yes, I believe it was People of Hope. I think some of the newspapers have been correcting that. Some were quoting that it's People of Praise, but I believe it's a People of Hope group that's very similar. But yes, I was called a handmaid, and I did live the Handmaid's Tale, and I speak about that at my website. I wrote an article after an interview with the U.S. Department of Justice called I Lived the Handmaid's Tale, Escaped of Martin in 1996. And we were to be totally obedient to our husbands. I was assigned a head who was Connie Hackenbrook in Corvallis, Oregon, had to meet every Tuesday night with other women. I was had to be submissive to my husband, and he had a head, and then all the men heads had heads, and then somehow it went all the way back to South Bend. To disobey was punishment. And when people tell me that this isn't a cult, or through the confirmation process, if she's refuting any of this, I was not allowed to leave. I was punished. I was forced to sit on the floor outside of meetings. The night my father died, I was not allowed to go see him before he died. One day I had surgery. I had 2 miscarriages back to back, and my doctor told me to go home and rest, but I was told to go to my women's meeting to be under my head, handmaiden head, Connie Hackenbrook. And when I arrived at the meeting after surgery, she said they were all going to go shopping. And I said, I just can't. I just got back from surgery. So I got up to do the right thing, to take care of myself and go home. And by that time, she had called all the cult leaders, my husband, and there was a car running when I got home, and I was literally kidnapped against my will, put in the car and brought to all the cult leaders. And Ed Brown of Corvallis, Oregon, he interrogated me with others and my husband through the night. And I just wanted to go home and rest. But those are just a few examples of basically there was shunning and shaming and degrading. I wrote in my memoir that I said I had learned as a child that if I didn't do as I was told, my personal safety would be endangered. My experience in the People Who Praise cult reinforced these experiences. Isolation and emotional and mental pain would follow any questioning of other motives, power, and control of me. And shunning is a cruel and inhumane practice within many church groups and cults, a form of silent ridicule. And basically, I did live the Handmaid's Tale in this group.
You left the group 35 years ago, and I
Yes.
can see that you're visibly getting emotional right now.
Yes.
So is this damage that's been inflicted upon you, is it still affecting you in your everyday life?
Oh, I believe people that's gone through this, even it's very similar to the Scientology documentary. But yes, we're a part of the Scar clan, but we can heal. And even my book title is Bonshia, Making Light of the Dark. And Bonshia is a Yaqui Indian word. It means out of the darkness into the light. And I believe we can make light of the dark. We can use these experiences to help ourselves and others and be a light. And even right now, I feel, this is just a piece of all Judge Amy Coney Barrett, but I'm just a piece of the story. There's many other things that we should be very concerned about, but it helps raise awareness about cults. I interviewed for an hour and a half with Stephen Hassan, who's one of the nation's top cult experts, and he labels and identifies the People of Praise as a cult.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And we can heal, and that's what today is about.
Yes.
And thank you so much for sharing your story. And as we talked about, you're going to come back and we're going to go more in depth on your story and go more in depth on the aspects of political power and these particular movements. So again, thank you so much for sharing your story. You're very brave. And like I said, today is a day of healing. And now, since we're going to be talking about healing, I'd like to turn the meeting over to our healer-in-chief, Dr. Daryl Ray.
Wow, healer-in-chief, that's a new title. I guess I hadn't heard that one before.
And we're going to be launching a poll. Daryl, would you like to tell us about the poll that I'm about to launch?
Well, I've just got 2 questions. I'm asking everyone, fill it out as you like, and we don't know who said what. It's just kind of a way for you to get in touch with some of the content I'm going to talk about, and to see who's been affected by some of this stuff I'm going to talk about. So feel free to take the poll. It's just kind of an informal way to get into the content a bit. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to, let's see here. Where is my screen? There we go. All right. Well, thanks, Jason, for arranging all of this. This is great. And Coral, wow, what you just said fits, I won't say beautifully, but perfectly, right into what I'm going to be talking about here. That's, thank you for what you've done. I'm sure you've already helped many people in just writing your book and getting it out there. So I'm going to be talking about religious roots and its treatment. But first of all, I want to just say I'm here in part because I'm passionate about helping people deal with the consequences of leaving any religion. And I of course, we're in the United States, so a lot of focus on Christianity, but it doesn't matter whether it's Scientology or Islam. All religions tend to use the same techniques. And so if you hear me using Christianity as examples a lot, it's because a lot of our clients that recover from religion are Christian. But that doesn't mean that every one of these techniques and methodologies and problems don't crop up in the other religions. Some of you may be familiar with my books, The God Virus and Sex and God, but I actually deal with quite a bit of the information we're going to talk about here today in both books in different fashions. I do want to caution everybody to begin with, though, we're going to be talking about some tough stuff. So feel free to take care of yourself and make sure you feel comfortable and safe. If you don't, then it's not going to hurt my feelings if you think you need to leave. I don't get into heavy, gory, deep stuff, but it's still important just to take care of yourself. Last, this is not meant for self-diagnosis. I want you leaving here saying, oh, I've got religious trauma syndrome, because you're not the right person to diagnose that. I'm not the right person to diagnose this. I'm just going to give you some guidelines. And then if you want to go explore this further, go find a good therapist and talk it through with them. Whether you've experienced trauma or not may not even be relevant in the long run. You have experienced indoctrination that, whether it was traumatic or not, as we'll learn later, still impacts people's lives and can impact your life on a daily basis long after you've left religion. So let's see here. Play my thing. All right, there we go. So what is trauma? We've got a pretty functional and fairly simple definition. It's a change in the brain. That's what trauma is. And there's very good empirical evidence that shows that stress hormones, that changes the amygdala, the fight center, all those things can happen and do happen as a result of trauma. Now, that trauma can be a soldier in Iraq or Afghanistan, and we can see through MRIs and other medical diagnostic methodologies that something is happening in the brain, and we can tie that to the trauma that person experienced. What we're going to talk about today is that there's many other ways of experiencing trauma, not just going to war. And we'll understand why that is in a few minutes. So the first thing we see oftentimes in people who have experienced trauma is hypervigilance. And that means they are easily set off by things in their environment that they perceive as potentially dangerous. And they're wired to interpret these things, these apparent dangers, in such a way, and in such a way that their body just instantly trigger. And we've got this word in our lexicon nowadays, triggers, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. People are primed for responding to their environment without thinking, irrationally, and without even normal things that happen every day can be triggers. And I'll tell you one that hits me occasionally. I'm going down the damn road and I see a Jesus is going to send you to hell kind of sign. Now, I'm not going to say I'm traumatized by that, but it does piss me off sometimes. And I'm sure many of us have some of those kinds of things that happen in our environment. But what would happen if you just seeing that sign were thrown into an emotional turmoil that lasted for another 24 hours and you just couldn't get over that? That would be a sign that you're probably experiencing some kind of religion-related trauma. If you've experienced intrusive thoughts, people who experience demons or experience the fear of demons and supernatural interpretations of natural events in the world, those people could be responding to traumatic events in their life, going clear back into childhood. And that's what we're going to focus a lot today. Serious sleep disturbances. I don't know how many people have told us on our Recovering from Religion hotline that they still wake up decades after becoming an atheist, still wake up with night terrors around hell or nightmares. If you get into a cognitive loop, a trap where you just can't stop thinking about something, you get a religious song stuck in your head that seems to have a negative effect on you, that too can be related to, and of course, depression. Depression's probably very common among people who have experienced some kind of trauma around their religious upbringing. So the Centers for Disease Control has got a really interesting and I think very good little test you can take that I want to introduce you to, and feel free to go on the CDC's website and take this little test. It can help you understand help you identify whether or not you may be experiencing some level of trauma. Again, it's not for self-diagnosis. It's to point you in the right direction to then say, okay, maybe I need to go get help. You may have been experiencing symptoms that you have no idea they're connected to a trauma you experienced earlier on. So that's all this is for. I'm very careful. I don't want people self-diagnosing, but I do want people paying attention and then going and finding help for the issues. So this is a simple survey test, if you will, for adverse childhood experiences, ACE, adverse childhood experiences. And what they do is they go through different dimensions, asking you a few questions. Actually, it's very short. There's not very many questions in this. And what they can help you find is, did you experience adverse childhood experiences that have continued into your adulthood, and that you may not be aware of why you respond to your environment in a certain way? And maybe it's related to the way you respond to relationships. Maybe it's the way you respond to your own children or how you parent your own children. So there's some good things to look at in this little test. But I found it, and I love it. As you can tell, I think it's something everybody could benefit from looking at. You'll get a score from it, and it'll say, you probably need to look at this harder, or yes, you definitely got some symptoms that might be needing taken care of. However, I've noticed one thing in this test, even though I'm very supportive of it, it does not one mention of religious abuse. I don't think that's a fault of the survey because it wasn't focused on religion. But I think if you go through the little test, you can identify that, oh yeah, religion has a lot of those effects. Were you beaten a lot as a child? Well, why were you beaten? Was it because you had a narcissistic parent that seemed to be sadistic about parenting? Or did you have a very good Christian parent who thought, spare the rod, spoil the child? Both could have the same effect. But what's the root of that? One is religious. The other may be rooted in some psychological problems of the parent themselves. You can have perfectly caring and nice, wonderful parents that beat their children because they think that's what they're supposed to do. And their preacher tells them that, among other people. Hold on a second. I've got, I'm trying to get rid of that. Well, anyway. So what we see in trauma of some kind, and is that I can't see my slide. Jason, can you take the poll down for now? Because I can't figure out how to get rid of it. Uh-oh, that made it even worse. Hello?
I just took the poll down. I don't know how to.
Okay, well, it's now right in the middle of my whole screen. I can't see anything.
I think if you click on the top of the poll and just drag it to some other place on the screen, that should.
I'm going to stop screen sharing because this is not working at all. I'll come back in. Okay, that got it. That got rid of it for me. Okay, back to screen.
Really free software.
There you go. All right. Well, we're doing fine. So there we go. I'm going to get rid of that. So there's actual neurological impact when somebody experiences trauma. And we see this, you can actually measure it in things like the limbic system and how it functions, the hypothalamic, the pituitary adrenal axis, and all the activity that goes around the swinging of cortisol levels in relation to stress. We see it in neurotransmitter dysregulation. And that's partly why things like antidepressants help, because they help you re-regulate some of the neurotransmitters that go off in our brain. So once your brain is programmed to respond dysfunctionally to an environmental influence, your hormonal system gets out of balance and the neurotransmitters get out of balance. And of course, medication can help with that. It's not always a cure for it. It's not a cure at all. Actually, it just helps. But these are all directly related to trauma. When somebody experiences trauma, they are experiencing a real impact of whatever that was in their neurological system. It's not a figment of their imagination, and they can't just get over it. You can tell people all day long, that dog is not going to hurt you. But if that person experienced real trauma around a dog as a child, they may take more than just your suggestion that that dog's safe. They may have to get some therapy and some help to desensitize themselves to that particular stimulus in their environment. So, but there is good news in all of this, and that is that there are resilience factors that the CDC found, and it seems to float over into religious trauma as well. And that is, if you've got supportive adults in the environment, a child who's going through a potentially traumatizing experience, if they've got somebody in their environment that can be supportive of them. Let's say you've got a child with really fundamentalist parents, but they have good access to an aunt or an uncle who is not fundamentalist, who's caring and kind and supportive, and they got regular access to that adult might actually prevent them from experiencing the trauma of the fundamentalist child rearing practices.
So Daryl, here's a question.
Yeah, sure.
You just brought up the neurology of this particular situation with the amygdala and cortisol. Since we're talking about religious trauma and why it might be difficult to avoid, to break away from particular individuals, could it be that with the way that oxytocin functions with the dopamine and serotonin channels, that people get hooked on being part of their particular religious grouping that they were in before? And so having that supportive person can help reestablish those particular connections.
Well, it would be impossible to say what the neurobiology is going on to any given person. And whether that, and I'm positive what you just said, that pathway is probably likely in some people. But the fact is, if this person has been so programmed within a certain environment and their only outlet, I'm going to actually get back and talk about that a little bit later. In fact, just a couple slides from now. So let me put you off a little bit. I'll just say the pathway you just outlined is a likely pathway, but I'm not going to sit here and say that's true of all people or why all people stay in cults or something like that. As we already heard from Coral, it sounded to me like she felt trapped and no way to get out because her options seemed to have been systematically cut off. I don't know what was going on at that time in her life neurologically, but she still felt trapped, whether it was a neurobiological thing or a serotonin thing or anything else. That's my long answer to your short question. Another resilience factor is, and feel free to jump in and ask any questions that people might have within the audience. Timely removal from the environment can really be helpful if you get the child out early on, or if the child has other resources, like for example, a teacher. Maybe they've got a teacher at school that's got a kind and listening ear, and they can help the child get through whatever the potentially traumatizing event is. We did a survey of our secular therapists at the Secular Therapy Project. And just before I get into this, I just want to let you know what the Secular Therapy Project is before I tell you what our results were. It's a listing, a vetted listing service of therapists who will not send you back to church or pray with you. They're going to use evidence-based methods. And I want to recognize one of your members, one of the people here is right now, and that's Richard Wade, because Richard was, in fact, one of the founding members of the Secular Therapy Project way back when. I'm not sure, 2012, I think. Richard, wasn't that when we started?
Yeah, I believe it was around 2012.
Yeah, and you stayed in the process for 4 or 5 years. And Richard was one of the members of the vetting team. And vetting team are, generally speaking, atheist, highly trained, evidence-based therapists that look at anybody that applies to our program and either is approved or not approved based on that. And I'll also point out that we have almost brand new within the last week or two, Christy Lanterman. She's watching today too. She just was recently admitted to the Secular Therapy Project and is joining us today. Thanks for joining us, Christy. I just like to let some people know that what I'm going to talk about, we've got 2 people who know from the inside out what this is all about. So what we did is we sent out a survey to our secular therapists, and we asked them, in your professional experience, what % of clients mention adverse childhood experiences related to religion in some significant way? And that's the key, related to religion. The examples we gave them was spanking for not learning Bible verses, punishment for masturbating, parents abusing gay siblings in front of you, threats of hell for disobedience, and that sort of stuff. And what we got from our therapists was 36% of our therapists said they had clients that had expressed this type of trauma to them. Now, they weren't clients that came to them necessarily through the Secular Therapy Project. This is like their entire client base, 36%. So this is not a self-selected group. I think that's important to know. They didn't come through the Secular Therapy Project because they had religious trauma. They were just coming to a therapist for help. They don't even know who we are, and they came to the therapist. So 36%. I don't know if that would hold up in the general population, but it points to the fact that a lot of therapists are seeing people who come to them with presenting problems that we can trace back to religious trauma of some kind. Could I ask a quick, Richard or maybe Christy, either one of you, what do you think of that particular percentage? How does it stack up to your experience as a therapist?
Well, my experience would not be like a random selection. It's a pre-selected group, but my impression of the field in general and just the way I hear things, yeah, I think I'm not at all surprised at that large a percentage. Not at all.
Okay, so this would.
I'd put a caveat on it. It could be a lot greater because people will still be reluctant to attribute all sorts of trauma to their religious environment.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Like a child of an alcoholic denying that it's really drinking.
Yeah,
it's something else.
You're right. Right. Christy, do you have anything you'd like to throw in there?
Just that I agree with that. I would say that it was about a third that maybe report it specifically to bad religious parenting practices, but there's probably more in that people don't understand that that's likely an adverse experience, and they just don't have that awareness yet.
Right. And that's part of the reason I'm talking to you today, because I want to raise awareness of what religious trauma is, what probably causes it. You know, this term, religious trauma, did not exist 10 years ago. Dr. Marlene Winnell was the one that coined the term about 10 years ago, and she's been kind of beating the drums for 10 years. And unfortunately, earlier this year, we were scheduled in April to have a major conference in Canada on religious trauma syndrome, where we were bringing therapists and other kinds of experts together. And of course, it had to be canceled because of COVID. But what we wanted to use that as an opportunity to get this in the news media, get this in front of people, because I think what you said, Christy, they don't have the language, and they haven't, as Richard talked, they're probably not tying it back to religion. And they're resistant to that because they're taught that religion is always good. You can't blame religion for this. So religious abuse, I want to give you a little thought experiment here. What if you were in a home and you were a 5, 6, 7-year-old child, and your parents were the very source of the most fear in your life? These are the people you're totally dependent upon. You don't eat, you don't sleep, you don't have a place to sleep if it's not for them. And yet they're the source of the fear you experience every day. You're not sure if you're going to be hit or beaten or grounded or yelled at. You know, there's any number of things that can happen, and you have no control over it. Then you might also experience a tremendous amount of threatening behavior from your parents. I'm going to spank you if you don't do this. Shaming behavior. Your body is your worst enemy. You're growing into adolescence, and you're having your first period as a girl, and you're finding that your parents are shaming you for your sexuality and threatening you if you ever have sex. You're told early on that you can't masturbate, and maybe you're caught masturbating as a boy or a girl, and you're shamed for that. There is literally no safe space for that child in that home. And you need to as a child, you must constantly monitor yourself and monitor your behavior in fear of the religious consequences, because this God is watching you. They know, this God knows if you masturbate, and if you're improperly indoctrinated, you will have incredible guilt or even shame as a result of simply masturbating. And I've met many people say that. One of the priests I worked with years ago, he's no longer a priest, he's an atheist now, but he said, I could go about a month without masturbating. I mean, this guy was a priest. He went through 8 years of total training as a priest. And he said, while I was in training, I'd go about a month without masturbating. And then I'd masturbate. Then I'd run to confession as soon as I could, because I didn't want to go to hell for masturbating. And then he went to a zoo one day and saw some apes masturbating and thought, well, if the Pope believes in evolution and the chimpanzees are masturbating, maybe it's not as bad as they say it is. And he told me that was his first step out of religion and into becoming an atheist. So there you go. Go to the zoo to get your theology or lack thereof. What you see in children, and I'm focusing a lot on children because that's where we see the roots of religious trauma in most people. We see them skipping or missing developmental stages. I mean, they just literally miss them. I mean, what if you were shamed from the minute you started puberty until you left your home about your sexuality? And what if you're a gay child and all you heard all your life was how you are a gay child, all gay people are going to hell, and condemnation by the minister? You don't dare come out as gay in your church or to your parents. You're likely going to miss entire stages of development. It may be very difficult for you, whether you're, no matter where you are on the sexuality spectrum. You have no way of developing good relationships with other people, good relationships with other sexes or genders. You just are lost in that. I just read the other day some kind of study. I didn't read the study. I just think I saw it on Human Matus blog, something about relationships, that evangelicals don't have know how to have relationships with the opposite sex. The Mike Pence syndrome, where you can't be in a room alone with a woman, kind of bullshit. Well, what's that going to do to your development if you can't even experiment with how you interact with the person of the opposite sex? And so we see missed developmental stages in children, and that can be exacerbate the trauma. You can just imagine to play that out a little bit in your own mind. I hear people often say, I missed my whole childhood. I was so afraid. I've heard so many people say, I missed my adolescence because I was always in church. And I was afraid of my body. I've had people say, I didn't masturbate until I was 25 years old because I was scared to death of my body. And now I can't stop masturbating. So they're catching up, making up for lost time, I guess. But the fact is, these people have missed a developmental part of their life through the abuse of that religion. Their biology continued to develop, but their psychology could not develop. One part was being stifled while the other part continued. Their breasts continued to grow. They still had secondary sexual characteristics like growing hair and beards, and yet they were denying their sexuality. Now, as you know, I harp on sex a lot, so don't take that as unusual for me. I think sex is one of the most important developmental stages that people miss in childhood and adolescence when they're under some kind of religion. Religion gets a pass all over the place, and we see this, and that's partly why I was concerned enough about the issue of psychotherapy that I started the Psychotherapy Project back in 2011, 2012 that we mentioned earlier with Richard. What I've seen is that therapists are trained to tread really, really carefully around religion. And some therapists are so religious themselves, they cannot admit that religion could cause a trauma. And I want to start challenging that. In fact, we at Recovery from Religion and Psychotherapy Project are going to be systematically challenging that in the coming years. I think there are very few therapists right now that are aware of the trauma religion can cause. And one of the things that therapist, if that therapist is religious, they're going to have to come to grips to the fact that their religion, whether it be Christianity or Mormonism or whatever, is a root cause of trauma. And I'm watching some therapists that are probably damn good therapists. They're not a part of our psychotherapy project, but I'm watching them and I'm talking to them, and we interact a bit in some organizations, groups that I'm involved with. How does an active Mormon psychotherapist who got their PhD from Brigham Young University, where they have to sign a contract with the university saying they will not have sex before marriage and they will not masturbate, how does that person get out of that program with a PhD and then work with people who are experiencing trauma around their sexual abuse as a Mormon? I mean, it boggles the mind. How do you twist that up and stay a Mormon? How do you actually help somebody when you yourself may have been traumatized? I mean, literally, that therapist, if they did follow that contract and not masturbate through a whole PhD program, I'd say you're fucked up. I mean, that's what I would tell them. But of course, they wouldn't like me saying that. So anyway, I see, as you know, if you read my book, the God Virus, I see religion as an infection of an entire culture. And we're seeing it right now with the way the religious right has taken over the Supreme Court, for example. But let's just think about it. If 60% of our population was infected with tapeworms, we could say it is normal to be infected with tapeworms. But it doesn't mean it's not really debilitating. It is normal to be infected with religion in our culture, but it is also very debilitating. It is a tax on our system. That tapeworm is taking energy away from our physical bodies. Religion takes a whole bunch of things from us. It consumes our time. It consumes our resources. It prevents us from doing things that would be best for us. For example, you're depressed, go to pray to Jesus. Don't go to a psychotherapist. Don't get medications. It even does things to make us not do what's best for us physically. When Jehovah's Witnesses do not allow for blood transfusions, for example, or the Church of Christ Scientists won't let you take an aspirin. You know, this is debilitating. It is an infection that prevents us from doing what's right for us as human beings. So yes, religion is normal, but religion is also debilitating in the same way that a massive infection of tapeworm would be. We had one chat client come through to us recently, and I thought this was really a funny quote. I pull quotes from our chat line just because some of our clients have better quotes than I can come up with. He said, it was so easy to lose touch with reality when you're not dealing with reality in the first place. And that's what religion does. You know, it takes you out of the real world and tells you, here's this fantasy world over here. So feel free to steal that. I can't tell you the name of the client for confidentiality reasons, of course, but I think it's really, really true. And here's the problem with this. And I think this speaks right to where we are today as a culture. We're seeing an explosion of conspiracy theories and QAnon and, you know, flat earthers, you name it. We're seeing all this stuff coming through. And I'm going to suggest that if you're raised in an organization, in a religion that denies science, that denies logic, that never teaches you critical thinking skills, you actually are being taught, systematically being taught in such a way that you are susceptible now to being infected with the tapeworm of QAnon or the tapeworm of flat earth. You know, that's what we're seeing. It's an infection of the mind, and it's directly related to the fact that religion prevents you from developing rational defenses against some of this crazy stuff that floats through our environment. It's like COVID. I'm right now seeing COVID. If you read my books, The God Virus, you know, I point out example after example where biological viruses work together with religion viruses to propagate each other. And that's what we're seeing right now. I mean, the church that opens its doors with no masks and no social distancing is forwarding the Jesus narrative, and it's forwarding the COVID infection. They are working hand in glove, just like Catholicism worked hand in glove with smallpox. The two go together, and if you don't reform your ways, you're going to get smallpox. Okay, if you get smallpox, it must be because you're a heathen and don't believe in Jesus. I mean, that's the way the thing works, and that's what we're seeing today. If you got COVID, you must not have enough faith in Jesus. These things work really well together and go towards traumatizing people. I think we are currently seeing almost a culture-wide potential for trauma as the COVID virus comes through our culture. We're seeing all these second coming things. I see Jehovah's Witnesses taking advantage of this all over the place. Mormons are talking about it too. It's a great opportunity for the God virus to resurrect itself, even as it's been being challenged by secular society. As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Marlene Winell coined this term, and this is a quote from her. In general, people who have not survived an authoritarian fundamentalist indoctrination do not realize what a complete mind rape it is. And I totally agree with Dr. Winell on that.
So, Daryl, there's a question that fits in really well right now. The person asking the question says, I believe religious trauma can also differ by religion. What's the worst of the worst? And I'm assuming of all religions, or in your perspective, out of, let's say, several major religions?
Yeah, that's actually a good question, because I really do think there are differences in the level and amount of trauma that comes out of different religions. Excuse me. I will even go so far as to say, I think some cultures have been traumatized by the religion that infected them. For example, take Islam. When Islam goes in and infects a culture deeply, as it did in Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and it creates traditions like female genital mutilation, And, oh, by the way, male genital mutilation. I don't equate those. Don't hear me saying that, but they're neither one very good to do to people. And they make it a tradition, as you read in Ian Hershey Ali's book, of doing the FGM at 12 years old with no anesthesia. And think about that. What if you had an entire culture where every girl and every boy has their genitals mutilated at 12 years old with no anesthesia? And pretty much everybody you know goes through that experience in the name of their God. What does that do to the psychology of these people? I think there are actual cultures on this planet where everyone in the culture has, we could probably do MRIs or some kind of other test and see that they have experienced trauma. And they then turn around and propagate that trauma onto their children, generation after generation. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who believes in Islam has been traumatized. I'm just saying if you look at those specific cultures, because there are cultures where that is true, that everyone's had experienced FGM, then we know those people probably have been traumatized. That's the extreme over here. But what about my father? I'll give you a great example. My father's, my grandmother was a flapper in the 1920s. She was fast and loose. She had a good time, and we've got some evidence of that, even though she became a fundamentalist. She supposedly divorced my real grandfather, and within 10 months was remarried to the only man I knew as a grandfather. We found out later she lived in sin for 10 years before she actually got married. The wonders of genealogy these days, you can find out shit about your own family you didn't know was there. And so Granny lied to us her whole life about her sexuality. She lied about her whole life about being involved with another man, having a child. And then who knows? We're not even sure. Well, I won't go into my family history. What I will say is that when my dad was 12 years old, which would have been around 1940, my granny got religion with a vengeance. She got infected big time. And she somehow got infected with the Dr. Kellogg version of sexuality and realized that you can't let your children masturbate. So you've got to circumcise your boy children. And she took my dad in, and without any anesthesia, I know this because my dad told me personally. This traumatized my dad. He got circumcised with no anesthesia at the age of 12 years old. So this is a Christian. This is not Islam. How many people had that kind of thing done to them? We know that there is female genital mutilation within Christianity. It has been. It still continues in some corners. It's not widely known or widely advertised. And I'm not saying it's common, but it's there. What does this do to people? What does this do to our culture when people are shamed for their sexuality? And I know it really fucked my dad up. I know it messed up his sex life with my mother. I won't go into why I know all this, but I know it firsthand. So I kind of answer your question there, Jason, or the listener's question. There are people out there that, regardless of religion, have been traumatized by the practices of that religion. And I submit that Mormonism, that is so extremely shaming of boys and girls who express themselves sexually at appropriate times, that's got to have some traumatic impact on them. Jehovah's Witness is the same way. However, being raised in an Episcopal church, or a Unitarian church for sure, you're not going to experience that kind of trauma. Even churches that are only mildly fundamentalist, you might not experience. I grew up in a fairly mild version of fundamentalism. I was not traumatized. I can take the adverse childhood experiences test, and I think I get a 1 out of a possible 12 points. So I escaped it. I'm glad I escaped it, but I know too many people who were raised in my same church who didn't escape it because their parents took that part of the religion much more seriously. I don't know. Does that answer your question a bit? Hopefully. I want to read a an example of hypervigilance. And this comes from a direct quote from within our Recovered from Religion community. Basically, my family were and still are very end times oriented. My whole childhood was filled with daily fear that I had missed the rapture, like literally every single day. It was all I could think about. I asked for help from my family and other church members, and they basically told me to pray and trust God, which didn't help me at all. I am at the point where I no longer logically believe any of this, but the fear that I have is still there. It's instinctual, as this person says. It completely bypasses my rational mind and puts me in a state of panic. I'm 30 years old and wish I could live and be free from this fear. That is religious trauma right there. This person continues to suffer at the age of 30 from the trauma they experienced as a child. So religion is not benign, and we see it being sanitized, and sanitizing religion does not take the trauma away. Many religions say, God is good. Islam's a religion of peace. I like to say Christianity is a religion of love, like Islam's a religion of peace. Put that together. Small children are biologically dependent upon their adult caretakers. It's built right into their survival mechanism. The child that doesn't listen, 10 or 20,000 years ago in the African savannah, the child that doesn't listen to their parents is probably going to get eaten by lions. So we've got deeply embedded in our genetics the need to obey our parents and listen to our parents. But if that same parent says, don't go over there because there's a lion will eat you in the bush, she goes, but don't go over to that tree because there's a devil lives in that tree. The child has no way to determine which of these things is fantasy and which of these things is reality. So religious teachings take hold very easily in the underdeveloped brains, and it gives convenient controls to the adults. It's an abuse of power when a parent uses threat of hell or demons or devils to control a child. And this then continues from generation to generation. And it continues the entire memeplex of any religion that then becomes just a part of the whole culture and teaches things like self-loathing and fear of your sexuality and that sort of stuff. So this kind of thing can stay hidden for years. Here's a client that told us, I had a panic attack Saturday when I stepped foot in the church for the first time in 9 years. I thought I could handle it. I know it seems weird, but the level of indoctrination is deep. Another client said, those pervasive beliefs are like a dormant virus. I never know when they will activate. And it impacts relationships. This person says, it left me hating men in the church and then struggling with men outside of it. All I seem to have experienced is weirdness or abuse with everyone, and it seems so I'm scared all the time of men. So this person obviously was impacted by in their ability to create and generate positive relationships from this trauma. You see other things like sleep, depression, fear. I started wondering this quote comes from, I started to wonder if it all has damaged me believing in God and the Bible. It's traumatized my family because they lost me. I did lose me. I became so scared and religiously scared of hell. I was just depressed and obsessed with saving my family. This person got religious and went back to try and convert his family, and they distanced themselves from him because they didn't want to be around this fundamentalist person in their family. So he lost his family, and then he lost himself too, because he lost himself in the religion. And to this day, I don't sleep properly most nights, and now I'm scared of what I might have done to my own family, to my own mom. That's what this person says. Now they're leaving a religion or have left it, but they're still impacted by it. So RTS, or religious trauma syndrome, is often created by all sorts of scripts that we get in our brain. And there's oftentimes a lot of neglect. There's a lot of fake treatments. People get counseling from their minister or their priest, and they're told to pray harder and pray more and pray to take your sinful desires away. You know, that priest that tells you in confession that, you know, to pray harder about it, probably himself masturbated that morning or abused some children. So the advice you're getting from people is advice that they themselves cannot follow. There's tons of problems with Christian counseling. I won't go into this right now, but Christian counseling is probably more destructive than almost anything else you can do as a therapist, because it creates a system in which there is no escape. The Christian counselor is supposed to be helping you with your trauma, and yet they're pushing ideas and beliefs on you that that just bolster the trauma. There's lots of social isolation that comes within religious trauma and comes from homeschooling. I mean, think about the kid who's taught all this shit in their own home. They can't exactly go down the hallway and find their favorite teacher and ask for a second opinion, because their teacher is their parent. The academic restriction prevents people from learning. It focuses, and all the homeschool and all the fundamentalist groups focus on the social groups within the religion. You can't go out and learn good basic relationships with other people because there are no other people outside of your religion. You're stuck inside the social group. And there's certainly sanctions for interacting with other social groups. I had the opportunity to speak with our local secular homeschooling group here in town. It was really interesting. I didn't even know we had such a thing in Kansas City, but we did. I went and spoke to them, and I was fascinated because I went and spoke. They take a break, you know, a 15-minute break, go to the bathroom or whatever, and then I come back in, and then afterwards I talked to some of the kids. But I was observing the behavior in this school. Actually, it's a community center that they go to every week, for 1 day a week, and I'll bet there's 150 kids in this community center, all being homeschooled, but most of them are religious homeschoolers. There's only one secular homeschooling group in town. And when I went out on that little break, I noticed that all of our secular kids were like, all the other kids walked around them, you know, like, oh, they've got cooties, they got a disease, and not one religious kid interacted with one of these secular kids. They were isolated even in this homeschooling environment. All the homeschoolers had been taught, you do not interact with those secular homeschoolers. It was really weird. I went in the bathroom. It was kind of funny. You go in the men's bathroom here, and you could tell who the secular kids were and who the religious kids were, because they separated themselves even in the bathroom. That's how strong this religious programming is, and how you're sanctioned if you even interact. So, of course, we've all heard about conversion therapy, and the conversion therapy itself is designed to force people to hate their own bodies. And there's a huge conflict in the biology within the religious culture. The biology wants to take your body this way. The religion wants to take your body that way. And the conflict is horrible. And it leads to not only bad sexual development, but it leads to suicide. And we've seen so much of that in what we do. Our chat line agents are highly trained to watch and listen for this and to get people into suicide hotlines. I would say on average, we get at least one chat a week, and sometimes many more, where we have to really work hard to get that person into therapy, or to find a therapist and to talk to a suicide hotline.
So Daryl, there are two other questions that
Yeah.
come out of this. Number one, can you tell us about your hotline, how that got started, and how the outreach has vastly increased recently? Additionally, not only having the hotline because people can call in for assistance 24 hours a day,
Right.
but a question came out, why are there no Southern California groups listed on the Recovering from Religion website? And is this changing anytime soon?
Well, it's COVID, of course, has interrupted. Most of our local support groups have now gone on Zoom, doing just what we're doing right now, and they've been extremely successful. And at this moment, we have a new initiative we started about a year and a half ago to get more support groups in local communities. So that's grown dramatically. We've gone from about 25 groups to 55 groups just in a year. But we need them, we need groups all over the planet. So we have several services. First was the local support groups. That was the first thing I did when I started Recover from Religion, was start local support groups. And like I said, those have grown to 55 groups. But we need 1,055 groups, and we need volunteers. We need people to step up, go through our training, our support, join our system, and we will support you in creating a group in your area, as Brian's going to learn when he goes through the volunteer process. And we don't need one volunteer in San Diego. We need 10 volunteers. There's a church on every corner. So we could have a Recovery from Religion group on every other corner, probably. So there's no limit to the number of groups you could have. We have 3 Recovery from Religion groups right here in Kansas City that meet regularly. They meet 1 or 2 times a month in Kansas City. So that's service number 1. Service number 2 is our chat line. You can just go to our website and hit the chat button and chat in with an agent, and you tell them what you're concerned about or what your issues are, and it's peer-to-peer support. Our agents are very well trained, and they have at their fingertips lots and lots of resources to help people very quickly. Sometimes a person just needs a book to read, or just needs a website to look at, or YouTube to answer their question, and we can do that in seconds sometimes. Other times people need to talk through what they're experiencing, and we're good listening agents, and they'll listen to everything. We'll take all the time you need. We actually have agents. We have over 200 volunteers. At this time, we've got about 68 active chat line agents and a number of other agents on our phone line. And we cover 16 time zones right now. We've got international volunteers, tons of volunteers from Europe, Australia, New Zealand. The only time zones we don't have well covered are the Asian time zones right now. But we've got over 200 volunteers in different roles, and 68 of those are taking chats. We've got another 30 or so that take phone calls. We actually have direct phone lines now from Australia. You can pick up the phone and dial direct from Australia. You can dial direct from anywhere in North America, including Canada. You can dial direct from South Africa, and you can dial direct from the United Kingdom. We will be adding direct phone lines as we get finances and funding to do that, which means, yes, we need money to make this thing operate. And so if you've got a few extra bucks, get online and send us a monthly donation. We would really appreciate that. And so I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was also going to say that today is more than just an event with the Humanist Association of San Diego, and not to take the meeting completely to the side, but this is also a great way for recovering from religion to be seen as a resource by several of our communities across Southern California. And I wanted to take just a moment during the presentation, since we're talking about how we need not just 15 groups, but 1,500 groups, but I wanted to recognize some of the other leaders who are here as well, like Christina, who is the president of Atheist United up in Los Angeles. And then we have Dave and Rhett here from the Humanist of Orange County, and Tom Bresnahan. And additionally, we have an esteemed person on the chat today. We have Christine Shelska, who is a board member from the American Humanist Association.
Great. Wow, that's great. Well, I know Aaron Raw's here too. I think he's still on here anyway. That was.
And Aaron Ra was here a little while ago. I don't know if I see him right now, but we also had David Oliveria, who is the preaching humanist out of
Right.
Austin. So like I had said earlier, today is a community day so we could learn about healing. So one quick thing for those of you who aren't aware, we have a Southern California Secular Coalition. I just shared the meetup, and hopefully the result of today is that we can get more and more volunteers for recovering from religion to step up and help expand this vital service. Now
And
the
let me
commercial's over, so back to you, Daryl.
underline that. Underline that. I don't want to undermine it.
leave this in your culpable hands.
Is that a Freudian slip? Underline that, Jason, because when you create a recovery from religion group in your community, that brings people in who are dealing with their religious trauma in some way or their religious difficulties, and they have a listening ear to share their experiences with. When they're finished with that meeting, or one or two or three of those meetings, their next question is, where do I go from here? And your answer is, well, here's Atheists United. Here's the humanist group in our area. You know, here's the meetup for the agnostics or the skeptics. I guarantee if you have a recovering from religion group in your area, you will be bringing almost on a monthly basis new members into your community because they don't know where to go. And they don't want to, when they come to recovering from religion group, they don't want to say, I'm an atheist, because they probably aren't at that point in time. So they're not going to go to Atheist United. And oh, by the way, Atheist United people, they don't want to hear your story again. They've heard it 100 times. We are the place to come hear your story. And when you're satisfied, you've got the catharsis, you've healed, then you're ready to go join Atheist United. We are a halfway house between the church and Atheist United, between the church and the American Humanists. That's why I think we serve such a vital role in the community, and we can't serve that role if we don't have lots of local groups. So I'll just build on top of that. I want to move forward in my slides a bit. I want to talk about distortion. Many people experience trauma, and that leads to cognitive distortions in their life, and it leads to distortions in the way they live their life. But distortion does not mean trauma. Just because you have had your sexuality distorted does not mean, by your religion, does not mean you've been traumatized or that you're experiencing trauma. People can work through these things. We oftentimes have people come to our meetings that are able to work through this stuff without a therapist. They don't need to have, a lot of psychotherapy. They just need a listening ear. They need somebody to help them move forward. Maybe a year or two or three from now, they'll realize they need a therapist and they'll go find a secular therapist. But I'm not here to say everybody needs a therapist that gets out of religion. And not everybody who's been in religion has been traumatized. But I am going to guarantee everybody has been impacted by the religion of their childhood in some way. So I don't want to overstep this. I don't want to overdiagnose it, so to speak. I just want people to realize that no matter what religion you came from, some are worse than others, but everybody's probably being impacted. I mean, I really didn't believe the whole masturbation thing from the time I was a child. It never made sense to me, but I still felt shame. I still felt a need to hide that I masturbated as a child, as an adult. As if you ever seen one of my talks, I start them now, say, I masturbate, how many of you do? And I find that some humanists and atheists still can't admit they masturbate. So, but it's a fact. We're still impacted. I know too many atheists that still can't admit, to who they are as a sexual being. So most people raised in religion probably have some distortion, but it doesn't mean it's trauma. You might have moderate sexual problems. You might not be able to talk about sex with your partner, with your spouse or partner. You might have mild panic attacks around certain things like seeing a billboard. You might have an overreaction of anger to some kinds of things, like seeing a fear of hell thing. You might get really pissed off about that. And we hear this a lot in Recovery Religion. I feel people come to us, I'm 50 years old, somebody says, and I feel like I wasted 30 years of my life in religion or 40 years of my life in religion. And so there's a lot of anger that comes out of that. And that doesn't mean you were traumatized, but it does mean you're pissed off, and your anger response is not abnormal. It's not unusual, but let's try and channel that anger in a way that's productive. I'm not going to I've got videos and stuff to show. I'm going to skip through some of this. The main thing is that there's a lot of videos out there, and this particular person, I really like what they say. She's really shows great examples on how religious abuse leads to trauma. So one of the biggest presenting problems, as Christy and Richard will attest to probably, is depression. And all too often we see treating depression requires looking at some of the self-defeating ideas that have exacerbated or even caused the depression. And if you don't identify the root cause as religion, then it's going to be much harder to treat the depression. I hope that makes sense. But if the root or a significant part of the depression you're experiencing, say, is that I'm a horrible human being, that you somehow got that embedded in your brain, even after you left religion, you still believe it, then until you can challenge that cognitive distortion, you're probably not going to be able to treat the depression. And one of the problems is religiously motivated therapists are very reluctant to identify the religion as potentially the root problem. So therein lies the issue that we've already mentioned before about religious therapists. So religious therapists or non-evidence-based therapists are often trained so well to respect the client's beliefs that they fail to challenge supernatural ideas. And there are ways to gently help people examine their religious beliefs that might be underpinning their depression or whatever presenting problem they have. But we cannot continue as therapists, and we can't continue as secularists to ignore the psychological problems that come out of religion. I think it's important to underline that religion is not a mental illness. Let's not even go there. Religion can exacerbate mental illness, however. To label somebody who has got a deep faith as a Jehovah's Witness or something as having a mental illness is just flat wrong. That's even the diagnostic, the DSM-5 is clear about that. But I want to be just as clear, because the DSM-5 does not necessarily help us in this area. Religion may not be a mental illness, but religion can exacerbate mental illness, and it can cause mental illness, as we're seeing here today with religious trauma. So the language of religious people and the language of religion can really frame the discussion. It can prevent people from looking deeply at themselves, and it may prevent identifying what trauma is. I'm going to keep going because I'm running behind time. So what's the treatment? There's a number of different ways to treat what we're talking about here. First of all, PTSD is a diagnosis that you can get through the DSM-5. Religious trauma syndrome is not a diagnosis in the DSM-5. And whether it ever becomes a formal diagnosis is actually irrelevant to our discussion today. It may or may not become a formal diagnosis. I don't really care. What I do care about is you can identify symptoms, and they're the same symptoms. Someone who's experienced war trauma, think about a child in Syria right now who's going through the trauma of wartime. They feel no safety. The bombs may drop, the bullets may fly. Every day they're they're in fear of their life, fear of their safety. That probably isn't a lot different than the Jehovah's Witness parent who beats their child on a daily basis for not reading the Bible properly. So the symptoms coming from those two are going to look a lot alike. And we can be very confident it is trauma. It is actually trauma. Whether you want to call it religious trauma or PTSD, we need to acknowledge that. And so some people are debating whether RTS should be a formal diagnosis. And I really don't fucking care whether it's a formal diagnosis or not. I can look at the symptoms. I can look at the behavior. And I can see that there's depression, or I can see there's generalized anxiety. I can see there's OCD, there's panic attacks. All those things can be traced back to some form of trauma. Hence, no need for a new diagnosis in the DSM-5, so to speak. So there's lots of treatment methods. There's some really good stuff going on in the treatment of PTSD, and most of those treatment methods work for what we're diagnosed, what we're calling now religious trauma syndrome. Cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, mindfulness, EMDR, all of those things are currently acknowledged and endorsed as evidence-based methods for treating the kind of trauma we've been talking about here today. I don't have time to go into all those or what they mean or how they work, but if you've been through therapy recently and you've had a good therapist, any well-trained therapist is going to be using one or more of these approaches with you, whether you're in there for treatment for trauma or not. So I'll just leave it at that. There's other special cases I won't go into, and that's things like religious scrupulosity. We see a lot of that. That's really OCD for religion. You know, somebody washes their hands 50 times a day because they've got a scrupulosity around cleanliness. We see people who can't do anything before they pray the rosary 50 times. That's religious scrupulosity. And it's just taken the religious side of it rather than the hand washing side of it, for example. There's treatments for that as well. But nobody really is talking about religious scrupulosity. And I want to bring that to the fore. It's just another version of what we've been talking about here today. So we still know that you can grow, you can learn, you can develop. This was not for self-diagnosis, as I said right off the bat. If you think you might have experienced some religious trauma, then let's get out there and find a therapist. And people say, let me just say this. People tell me all the time, I can't afford a therapist. All right, you can't afford a therapist. How do you afford your current depression? How do you afford the fact that you can't maintain a relationship? How do you afford the fact that your kids are in fact suffering because you're not parenting them very well? That you're re-traumatizing your own children, perhaps. So I think if you put this in perspective, your trauma, the result of your religious training is costing you. It's costing you money, it's costing you time, it's costing you emotions, and oh, by the way, you're passing it on to your children. So don't think of it in dollars and cents. Think of it in quality of life. Let's improve your quality of life by helping you get rid of the programming you got as a child. So there's lots of resources out there. I will just direct you to recoveryfromreligion.org and the Secular Therapy Project, seculartherapy.org. And I would also recommend Dr. Merlene Wendell's book, Leaving the Fold, as a great place to start in understanding what religious trauma is and how to deal with it. You can also contact Dr. Merlene Wendell. She runs regular workshops in Journey Free. They're both online and in person. And this is not an advertisement for her. I just endorse what she does. So I will just say thank you so much, Jason, for inviting me to come here today. I appreciate the opportunity. And I'll be glad to take questions.
All right, well, real quick, if everyone could please unmute themselves and give a warm San Diego round of applause to Dr. Daryl Ray for such an amazing
Thank you.
questions.
I do have a question. I was raised in an evangelical Christian church, and I was forced to watch those Left Behind movies and everything, and I am now an atheist, and I'm still having issues with nightmares and stuff. I do see a therapist, but he won't talk about religion.
Okay, we're going to use you as a case study in here. No, Brian, that's why we started the Psychotherapy Project, because there are so many therapists out there that absolutely are scared shitless of talking about religion. I'm getting a really big echo here, guys. Is somebody?
I found it. I killed it. You're
Okay,
good.
thank you. So, first of all, I have a list of things to ask and look for therapists, and you can get that directly from me. I can send it to you.
Okay.
Or you can just chat in on the chat line and say, hey, I heard Dr. Ray say this, and I'd like to get that list. Either way, I don't care. I'm going to get it. I want to get it to you.
Okay.
I can give that to you. And then what you can do it as a two-step process. And I'm telling you this, but I want everybody to look at it this way, not just you. First of all, go back to that therapist and say, look, religion is a root cause of what I'm experiencing. I want to deal with it. If you're not comfortable with it, I'm going to have to find another therapist. Be brutal. You're paying them. You are the customer here. You call the shots. If he's that poorly trained, or if he's that scared of religion, then he probably shouldn't be working with you. I won't say any more. That's my attitude. Second, once you get this list of things to ask and work on with a therapist, you'll know what to ask your next therapist. In fact, you can send this to your next therapist, and you can say, do you agree with these things? And if you don't, I'm going to keep looking. Because any good secular, and you can find a secular therapist through us, but I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying these people need to get with the program and start realizing religion causes trauma. Sounds to me like you experienced some, and they need to take their hopefully evidence-based methodologies and use them to help you get over the trauma you experience. Does that work?
Yes.
Good. Get with me soon. Just
Okay.
Daryl at Recovering From Religion, spelled Darrel,
Okay.
at recoveringfromreligion.org. You know how to get a hold of me.
Mm-hmm. And I have my interview tomorrow with you guys. So.
Oh, good. Do you know who's interviewing you?
No, I don't remember the name of the person. No.
One of our top interviewers, and he's been doing it for 6 years, is Anthony Magnabosco. Do you know Anthony?
I think that might be who's interviewing me, but
Right. Good. Well, it doesn't matter. They all are well trained.
Okay.
Other questions?
I got one for you, Dr. Ray.
Yeah.
I was looking on your website a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, and noticed that there was no groups in SoCal, and I sent a message to your hotline, and my congratulations for your very prompt team. Eric got in touch with me within 48 hours and said, would you like to start one?
Oh, yeah, Eric, if Eric latches on, he'll latch onto you like a leech. You won't get away from him.
Yeah, so it looks like I'm headed down that path to set up the Los Angeles recovery group.
Daniel,
Excellent.
Yeah.
Eric needs more work to do, so good for you. Let's keep it busy. Now, I'm the Philly support group leader, so welcome to the fold, Daniel. You'll find we're a fun group. We're glad you're here.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
I did just real quickly. Sue's been a volunteer for quite a while. We're coming from religion. Can you just give them a overview of what you do as a?
No, I haven't. I'm brand new, Daryl.
Well, you've been around. You and I. I feel like I should know you. We haven't even met it. Well,
I go to a lot of groups since they're all on Zoom.
Yeah.
But, so you want me to just explain what a group is like?
The 1 minute version of what your group does.
What a group is like. Okay, and I've visited lots of groups. It ranges between 3 to 8 people, typically something like 4 or 5, and Everyone just signs on, and it's very quiet. It's very serious, very personal, and it's a safe place, and people, unfold, unpack. I was raised in this kind of church, and this is how I noticed it was a problem, and this is when I started having doubts, and people just bounce off each other and go, oh, me too, the whole time. The whole time is full of me too, me too. Yeah. They called it this in my church, they call it, but it works the same way. I'll never forget the day. It's very, very personal. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about issues. We talk about our own personal lives, which you can't really do in a secular group. I'm a member of lots of secular groups. That's not what they do there. So it's quiet, it's personal, it's lovely. They're always really great.
And give us another 30 seconds on the training you received to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
We had some reading to do. We had some resources to look at. It wasn't a big, hairy deal. What I really like, I'm a retired school teacher, everybody, and so I look for a good organization. And I was so impressed with what Dr. Ray has built, because I said, I won't be reinventing the wheel here. I've got all of those resources. If somebody comes to my group and they're a total mess, I've got people ready to help, because I'm not a psychologist of any kind. And you don't have to be a group leader, you just have to have compassion. Mm-hmm. So it was the fact that these are not just rogue volunteers doing whatever seems entertaining. No. There are strict guidelines we adhere to. You'll know, stay within the lanes, and all is good. And then there's all the other leaders, and we get together and we have each other to talk with. So we leaders have support from each other as well. But Eric definitely needs more to do. Keep him busy. Yeah.
Well, it's funny, when I went to the website and saw that vacancy in all of SoCal, I thought, well, everybody in SoCal must be cured. Nobody has any trauma.
Right. Well, that's what I found. There was.
But then I was, I run one of the Atheist United groups in Los Angeles, and reflecting back on the last 4 or 5 years that we've been in operation, almost without exception, at every meeting, someone has a personal story they want to tell. So just from that microcosm of experience, I know there's lots of people that we'll be able to cater to here in LA. And I hope it's just one of many groups that grows in LA. Well,
what you do, Daniel, is you with Zoom, you just go to everybody else's. You're welcome to come to mine in Philly. I'm on the 20th. You're going to have to figure out your time zones, but you go to a lot, and you just pick it up quickly. So you visit everybody else, and Eric will provide you with all that.
I'm sure he will.
Yeah, I couldn't believe there was nothing in all of Pennsylvania. That's why I signed up.
Wow.
Yeah. So welcome aboard. We're really glad to have you. You'll like it here.
Great, thanks. It just goes to show, though, he who asks the first question gets the most responsibility.
Well, I will say this, and I think Sue's kind of already mentioned it. When you join Recovery from Religion, you join a community, and everybody supports everybody else. We have regular meetings of all of our group leaders. They're not mandatory or anything, but you are never alone. Our message to our clients is, you are not alone. Millions of people have gone through the same thing you are, and we're here to help. And our message to our own leaders and our own support group leaders is, you're not alone either. You don't have to do this alone. You can literally have somebody on the phone or on the chat with you while you're running your group if you want. Thanks. We'll do whatever we can. And we have over 200 volunteers and growing rapidly. Todd, our former director, former because he only left last week, but he's still a volunteer. He told me that we have 160 volunteers in training, and we've got 200 now. I mean, it's just mind-boggling how fast we're growing. Now, not every one of those 160 are going to end up volunteering for us, or even volunteer on the helpline or the phone line. But we can always use more volunteers, because somebody calling from Australia is on a very different time zone. So we need, and we got a lot of people, we miss calls. We went from catching I mean, this sounds horrible, but 3 years ago, we were only catching 28% of the phone calls and chats that came in. And we needed more volunteers. We just couldn't train people fast enough and keep them fast enough. Well, this last month, we got a report that showed we are catching 72% this month, 72% of all chats and calls coming in. And that's getting close to the top because, you know, we can't help it when somebody hangs up as soon as we answer or there's a troll or that kind of thing. Some percentage of it's going to be missed just because of technology and that sort of stuff.
Can I say, Daryl, the reason I stick with this, because I'm a volunteer, you know, and I didn't suffer religious trauma, but the reason I stick with it, what I get from it is these incredibly brave people, especially for me, the young women. You know, my daughter's 30, so my heart goes out to the young women. They're so brave, and they believe in themselves in spite of everyone they love telling them not to. And they believe in themselves anyway. And I'm so inspired by them. So that's the reward we get, is hearing them pour their hearts out. It's incredible. So anybody, if that sounds good to you, come on board. Thanks for having us here today.
Daryl, in regard to your question about your appearance on this program, I really like your mustache because I got one just like it.
There you go. Mine's a little whiter than it used to be. It used to be really dark, but Google seems to like it too. It seems to identify me as a whole lot of people. I keep getting notifications that I'm in certain pictures, and all thing I can figure is my mustache. Other questions?
Thank you.
This is kind of an aside, I guess, but do you have any feel for what percentage of practicing American Christians are just faking it, just pretending?
Well, I think that's a trick question, isn't it, Dick? I think everybody fakes it to some degree. There's no way that anybody who espouses any religion with all the doctrines can be anything but faking some part of it. And of course, we see this almost daily with ministers who get caught, you know, with their pants down, and so to speak, figuratively and literally. So I will say this. I know so many people who were so deeply, deeply embedded in religion, so faithful. They were doing everything they could and to follow their Jesus or their Allah or whatever. And I have no doubts they were giving their all. They were giving every ounce of their energy. They were going to church every day. They were praying 5 times a day, you know, whatever it was. Whether those people are faking it or not may be the wrong question. They're doing the best they can with what they know. And that's where I come down. I tend to avoid judging people in any realm. I think most human beings, and I say most, because there are charlatans, there are assholes, but there are not nearly as many out there as I think we tend to believe. I think most people are doing the best they can with the information that they've got. And if you were brainwashed from the time you're 3 or 4 years old that you must do these things or you're going to hell and you're scared shitless and you've been beaten because of it or whatever, those people aren't faking it. Talk to my friend Gwen Blodgett, who was a Baptist minister's wife, or our executive director, Gail Jordan. These people, if you talk to them, they will show you how dedicated they were. Oftentimes, the people that are helping with recovery from religion, and Sue will probably be able to validate this, they were themselves the center of their particular congregation. They were the one leading the songs. They were in the preaching. They were teaching. They were about as deep as they can get. And now they're out here. I don't think there was a fake bone in their body. They were sincere in what they were doing.
I've met at least 3 group leaders who were called church planters.
Church, yeah, right.
They were the guy in their congregation who was going out creating new churches.
Right.
And now they've not only quit church, they're volunteering in our groups. I can tell you, the people that come to our groups, they really were living it. They were really believing it. There wasn't any faking in those people. There might be some, but that when the tears are streaming and the tissues come out, there's nothing fake about any of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I have a question for Sue.
Sure.
Well, and Daryl, when you form a group, when you start a group, is there any concern or risk for basically spies, people who will pretend to have these traumas, and they're basically there to look for other people who might have doubts, people they know or people they think they might be able to reconvert, anything like that, where they're there really for clearly insincere purposes? Is there any safeguards you ever have for that, or has that ever become a problem?
It's not something that's come up that I've heard of. Daryl, what do you think?
Richard, I've been doing these groups because the very first thing I did was start one of these groups back in 2009. That's when I started Recovering from Religion. And I have not once, the fear you've just expressed, I was concerned about too.
Mm-hmm.
It's not once happened. I'm not saying it can't.
Yeah.
It's never happened.
Well, that's reassuring.
Yeah.
All right.
The second thing is, though, our facilitators, the SUs, if you will, of the support world,
Mm-hmm.
they're well trained. And if such a person did show up, if they suspected something, we have our ways.
Okay, that's good.
The button in Zoom is called remove.
Yeah.
But we've never had to use it, so.
In every Monday evening, and I will tell you something, this Monday evening, you might want to sign in. We have something called RFRX.
I put a link in the chat, everybody.
Okay,
it's in there.
Great, thank you. Tomorrow night, we're going to have two excellent psychotherapists that are part of the Psychotherapy Project talking about shame and guilt. What's the difference between the two, and how do we handle shame and guilt from our formerly religious lives? And I will guarantee you are going to learn shit. These two are amazing. Both of them have spoken at our Monday night RFRXs. And that Monday night RFRXs are open to anybody on the planet. We literally have had people join from Europe and Australia at the same time. 3 a.m, somewhere, and they're still joining us. That's how good some of our programs have been. I guarantee everyone, and we put them on YouTube after they're over, but virtually everyone. It's 7 o'clock Central Time, every Monday night.
The link is right there at the bottom of the chat.
Yeah. You will love it. And I think this particular Monday night's going to be more important than almost any that we've had. Although you might go back. I did this very talk on our RFRX at about 6 months ago, and it was one of our most popular, most watched ones.
Right. Mickey has a question.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Hey, Darrell.
Hi.
I went to the Bill Gothard Basic Youth Conflict seminars when I was in my teens, and it stuck with me. I came out as gay in my late 20s, but it's true to the idea of all authority comes from God through your parents, through your boss. I went to work for my mother, and ran all my decisions, major life decisions, past her, and she died recently, and I just have this feeling of I have no direction. I'm feeling lost and confused, and so I'm starting to realize that this is a part of a lifelong habit of following this this disjointed philosophy.
Good. Well,
if you could comment on that a little bit.
Well, I'll say good for you, because it's always a growing process, and I'm glad you've discovered that for yourself. Depending upon how you're responding to that, are you finding new ways to react to your environment? Are you exploring new decision-making strategies?
Well, my biggest strategy is get help. You know, I have, I reach out to like tax accountants and, you know, other people who have businesses and get their opinions on stuff. I have this is my small business here. I'm a picture framer.
Oh, good.
It was my mother's shop. She sold it to somebody else in 2000, and then I bought it from him in 2005, and I've had it since then. I've been very, very happy with the business. But
good,
you know,
good.
her experience with the business, I leaned on her quite a bit for a lot of years, and yeah, now I feel this big hole in my decision-making process.
Have you explored therapy? Have you ever gone to a therapist just as exploration?
I did therapy for I had 20 years of meth use, and I've had therapy for that, but I haven't had any other therapies other than that. So that's probably a good suggestion. You want to finish that up?
Well, I would just say go to psychotherapyproject.org.
Okay.
And you can just put your zip code in, and you'll find we have quite a few in Southern California. California and Texas are our two biggest states with respect to numbers. I mean, Richard helped get some of those people. Yeah. So, I mean, I can't do therapy with you right now, but I will just say
no.
Every time you discover something new like that, it does. I'm not saying you have to have therapy every time, because I think that's just a part of growing, like learning new skills. But it never hurts to get a second opinion. And if you're going to get that second opinion, get it from somebody who has not been tainted by religious indoctrination. And that's why we're so adamant about finding a secular therapist, whether it's within our system or anywhere. I don't care. And again, those things I told you earlier, I would send Brian, I would send to you as well. I would give you those guidelines, and you can use them if you use them on our own too. I mean, I'm not guaranteeing our therapists are perfect. So make sure that what you're getting in a therapist is what you need. So
thank you.
Yep.
Daryl, Jason Hoblin had a question. Jason,
right.
Did you still have your question? You've been patient for a while there. Go ahead and unmute yourself. There you go.
Wait, my mouth is full of food though.
Yeah, I saw you chewing there. Sorry about that.
No. I appreciate the opportunity to ask Mr. Daryl Ray a quick question. It's not directly related with starting a local chapter, but if I can do a pre-comment before that. I'm in Orange County, so if there's anyone here that wants to also start one in the, so we'll have the trifecta, right? We'll have LA, Orange County, and San Diego for the recovering from religion chapters. Daryl, my question is about data. Like we go to the CDC for a lot of stuff, or you can look online at certain research papers for data. For your work specifically with recovering from religion, the sex therapy, where can I go? What are you? I hate to ask you, what are your sources, right? But where can I go to see, what is the ratio between number of secularists who masturbate versus Christians who masturbate, right? I mean, where's a good starting point for looking at for some data regarding a lot of the things you discussed?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I have a kind of a pat answer for you. And again, it's a research project that we did back in 2012, and we replicated it actually in 2017. We actually were able to determine that there's no fucking difference between the levels of masturbation of Christians and non-Christians.
Well, that makes sense.
At any age. That's just pretty much what we found. Now, there is a difference in the amount of shame they experience, but they're jacking off just as much, men and women. And we also looked at porn use, and we found that the onset of porn use, regardless of the purity culture bullshit, regardless of what a kid is being taught, porn use seems to start about the same time. And porn use actually is higher. And this is not my data. This is national data. but porn use is actually higher among religious people than it is among non-religious people. And you can break that down by zip code. There's a book called A Billion Wicked Thoughts. And what these I believe the University of Southern California researchers found in just, they use Google's, some kind of data set. They're gigantic, billions of data points. And what they found was basically the more religious a zip code is, the more they use porn. So now let's just say that if you're using porn, quote, I love that euphemism, using porn. Let's be honest, we're masturbating to porn. Whether you're male or female, you're masturbating to porn. So that probably means the more religious your zip code is, the more you're probably masturbating to porn.
Isn't there also a relationship between not just everyone engaging in masturbation, but looking at the most common porn genre for different areas?
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, If you look at Pornhub puts out a report about every 6 months. Of course, Pornhub's got practically like the market on data around sexuality and stuff, and they're finding the same thing, But they also show, what's the most popular porn of every given state. It's like Utah, what's the most popular Utah? And it varies quite a bit. It's kind of funny how much it varies. But if you'll get with me, who asked that question? Jason? No. Okay.
That was an analogy that I brought up.
Well,
not even an analogy. It's just
but the person who was it Jason Hobland?
Yeah.
Okay. If you will email me or ask me, I can send you, or you can just Google sex and secularism. Just Google sex and secularism and my name. You'll probably get the PDF and you can read it. It's a 44-page report with all sorts of graphs and stuff. We queried 14,560 people back in 2011, and you'll see the research and how we were able to suss out the differences between religion. We even found, and now this is a trivia question for everyone here. You need to remember this. What was the one religion commonly found in the United States that expressed the most guilt around sexuality? It was the most
guilt.
I got to go with Catholicism.
Okay, a lot of people guess Catholicism. Nope, that wasn't it.
Islam?
Nope. Commonly found. We didn't get a big enough sample of Islam. Any other guesses?
Jewish guilt?
Nope. All right, well, I'll give it to you. Number 1, Mormonism.
Whoa.
Number 2, Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventist, Pentecostal. Those are the top 4. And you had to drop down quite a ways before you got to Catholicism.
Wow.
In other words, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Pentecostals, those folks are teaching some nasty shit when it comes to sexuality. Hey, Bruce Gleason, good to see you, buddy. I just saw Bruce's name pop up here, so.
So if I can comment, Daryl, on that PDF you recommended, Sex and Secularism. I put a link in the chat. Just be careful of that website, Academia. They're asking to access your contact list. The answer to that is no. Cancel. But you can read the PDF on that page if you just scroll down.
Okay, good. And if you want it directly, I can email it directly to you.
Do you like the results of the poll that we conducted earlier?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I haven't seen them. What were throw it up there?
2 questions about trauma.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we got about 50+% say yes. Some are not sure. I wonder if we redid it, if any of that would change. Experience anxiety, and we have about 42%.
I have one question about the second. Is there a typo in the word wronged? I mean, was it
Yeah.
being wrong instead of
Yeah,
having
right.
somebody do something bad to you?
Yeah, it's wrong.
Yeah, that's why I was unsure.
Yeah. I sprang this on Jason like 3 minutes before we were supposed to go on. So forgive him for the typo because I was pushing him pretty hard. I totally forgot to ask him to do that.
Oh, I thought you were saying like fear of being wronged, like someone.
No.
Mistreated, yeah.
Yeah. No, you being wrong, or like, what if I'm wrong? I'll go to hell. What if I'm wrong? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So one thing that I thought was interesting, and it ties exactly into this. Last week, I gave a lecture on the science of being good, and just from an anecdotal perspective, there was one analogy that I used from Jonathan Haidt, a social psychologist out of New York, where he talks about morality and rationalizing moral scenarios. And it's his chicken example. And essentially, the idea comes up of a man is going to buy a chicken carcass from the store. He takes it home. He's going to eat it by himself, and that was his set goal. But in the process, he masturbates with it. And then the question comes, is it wrong? And of course, that's used to illustrate sort of a visceral gut moral reaction versus a deliberation over the fact that, well, he's not hurting anything. And one thing that I noticed, and this is just purely anecdotal, it just seems like those that I spoke with who attended the lecture or discussed it after the fact, who were never really religious to begin with, or who they left religion without any type of intellectual or moral compunction. They laughed at that and they had fun with that idea. And these people tended to be the more assertive atheists that want to have a strict separation between religion and society. And conversely, the other cohort that seemed to have a completely adverse reaction seemed to be those who left religion later, and they also were more accommodationist in terms of getting along with religious people. So in essence, those who didn't have such a religious drive still in their heads, they were among the mindset of, oh, this is hilarious, let's joke about this. Including, we had a chat about this other day on the Southern California Leadership Chat, where there was a small group who just started laughing and having fun with it, and some other people who were still quite uncomfortable. And it almost seemed like those who still had, if you've ever read Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, about the structural forces and the institutionalism that still drives a person's perspectives, it's like Christianity is a bird in an iron cage which has been constructed around that bird in terms of norms, and the bird has since long flown away and the iron cage is still present. That those who are left religion later were more affected by religion. They expressed a greater amount of discomfort and aversion to that whole just completely hypothetical example. And it just seems like you can take the boy out of the church, but you can't take the church out of the boy.
That's pretty much what we see. We see a lot of that. I did a talk to a major humanist organization. There were several hundred people in the room, but it was jointly sponsored by the Secular Student Alliance. So there was a lot of SSA people and a lot of humanists. When they came into the room where I was going to speak, I noticed they separated themselves. It was like on the left-hand side, my left, I'm facing the group. On the left-hand side, there's pretty much everybody that was there from the humanists. On the right-hand side, pretty much everybody there was from the Secular Student Alliance. So obviously there's going to be an age difference there as well. But when I start it's one of the only times in my entire career I've had anybody complain about my talks. But I start my talk with, I masturbate, how many of you masturbate? Virtually every hand on the right-hand side of the room went up, secular students. I don't think they got three hands on the other side of the room among the humanists. So, and those humanists have been around a lot longer and been atheists probably a lot longer than some of those kids have been alive, and yet they had trouble admitting to that. So it just underlines what you're saying, Jason. We are impacted by, we're a fish swimming in polluted water. You cannot help that. You could have been an atheist your whole life, but you've been surrounded by this pollution called Christianity, or if you're in Islam or whatever, and you're going to be impacted by it. And I hear a lot of almost lifelong atheists making arguments around the gender binary and things like that are just crazy from a biological standpoint, but they make sense if you're still a Christian atheist. And I use that term very deliberately. In one of my talks, I actually talk about how many of you are still Christian atheists. You believe all the Christian moral bullshit at some level, even though you don't believe in their God anymore. So it's a constant. I have so many people, and Sue and even Richard could probably vouch that we get so many people come in and say, I thought I'd gotten rid of religion, and then I found another layer, and then I found another layer, and then I found another layer. It is like peeling an onion to find all the crap you've learned from this culture and from the religion you may or may not have been raised in.
Have you seen the
ages.
Baylor?
We've got people that are in their 50s, 60s, and they're still struggling with it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep.
Yeah.
So Daryl, have you seen the Baylor religious survey? There were two waves of it, 2005 and 2007. They were asking two central questions, different cohorts across the U.S. In terms of religious affiliation, racial demographics, da-da-da-da-da-da. And in it, they were asking how engaged is God in the world, and how judgmental is God. And along with what you're saying, these two sociologists who conducted these two surveys, Chris Bader and Paul Frazee, they wrote a book about the results of their study in a fabulous book called America's Four Gods. And it just demonstrates that there still is a God concept of what atheists in the United States don't believe in. So it demonstrates that you can ask an atheist if they don't believe in God, well, what are the qualities of that God that you don't believe in? And they can paint a picture.
Well, that's an interesting angle. I have not read the book or the study, so I really couldn't comment on. But it sounds like something I should be acquainted with. Any other questions?
Well, superb. That was really excellent. Thank you, Daryl.
Yep. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Terrific discussion. Thank you.
Yeah.
One more warm round of applause for Daryl and Coral. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for setting me up so well, Coral. And do join us tomorrow night, Recovering from Religion, RFRX. You will not regret it. I guarantee it.
It's interesting. Yes.
And thank you all for being here. And we crammed a lot into this meeting, and I think that we got a lot out of it. And like I said at the beginning, that today is a day where we can come and focus on healing, and people relayed their personal stories that were full of trauma and pain, and there are resources out there, and it's clear that a lot of us do share these experiences, and coming together to share them is a way to recognize that we're not alone, and also finding out that we're not alone, especially during this existential crisis that we find ourselves faced with in a ubiquitous manner. It's more necessary than ever. So thank you again, Coral and Daryl. And now we have social time.